Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Drew Lawrence. I am an operations manager here at Military Veterans and Journalism. I am also going to be your host and moderator for today. Really excited about our journey. We're going to be pulling back the curtain on an esteemed news organization, NBC7, out of San Diego. And with that esteemed news organization comes an equally esteemed panel, which I'll introduce in a second. Um, First, just to go over a couple ground rules. If you're an attendee and you have a question, go ahead and feel free to put that question in the chat. I'll moderate it and ask the panelists as we go along. Or if you want to ask them directly, go ahead and use the raise your hand feature in the attendee section, and then I'll unmute you once we reach a lull in the conversation. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel, starting with Priya Sridhar. She is an award-winning, amazing political journalist with NBC7. She's also the host of Politically Speaking. You can catch her on the weekend, which I'm sure she's going to talk about. But she's also an officer in the Navy Reserve, so bringing that military experience straight to the newsroom. Going over to Ismael Estrada. So Ismael spent some time over at CNN, about 14 years before coming over to NBC7 in January. As a managing editor, he's going to talk to us a little bit about how the newsroom operates, what we can expect from local news, who decides the news, all the great things that you want to see that happens in the control room in the newsroom. We're going to get from Ismael. And then finally, last but not least, is Sage Pierce. She's a human resources manager, so she's going to teach us all the tips and tricks and how to get hired at a great organization like NBC7. But feel free to ask her about the newsroom. She was an executive producer, so she has experience there, and I'm sure she's happy to talk about it. But without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Priya. Priya, if you could just kind of give us an introduction of yourself and talk a little bit about NBC7 and why it's so important to the San Diego area.
Hi, everyone. So I've been with NBC7 since March of 2020. So right when the pandemic first hit, I've been with the station since then. So it's been a strange time to start a new job because I've been working from home the entire time. So I've actually, I think, met Sage in person like maybe once at like a drive-through party in our parking lot. But yeah, NBC is a great station to work for in San Diego. I guess we have, in a lot of our newscasts, we're the highest rated news station in town. And I think I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think we have amazing staff, but we also have dedicated reporters on a lot of beats, which I think is different from other stations in town. So one of the beats is politics, which is what I cover here. And I think it's been really important to have a dedicated reporter on that beat because I cover everything from city council to the county supervisors to the state assembly to our, congressional delegation in Washington, D.C. So that's a lot of people and a lot of policy to cover. And so it's nice to be able to form those relationships with our elected leaders. And I feel like they feel comfortable to contact me when they have stories that they want to get out, and I'm able to, because I know how to navigate the bureaucracy of all of those fun offices, I'm able to get them to comment on news of the day, whether it's a potential government shutdown due to a lack of funding or whatever. So that's sort of the day-to-day, but I've done everything from local news to working in DC to working overseas. And I've worked for TV stations and then most recently for the NPR station here in San Diego and even the Associated Press. So I've kind of had a variety of journalism experience.
And so given that variety, being at NBC7, can you speak to, why it's local news is so important? We talk about it all the time, but it's important to hear from the people who are actually reporting it. So why is it so important?
So I feel like the pandemic was a great example of why local journalism is so important, because depending on where you lived in the country, you were having extremely different experiences as far as what you could and couldn't do when it came to restrictions. So, for us here in California, we had a very complicated color-coded tier system that our governor put in place. And So it was my job, the county supervisors at first on a daily basis, and then it turned into a weekly basis. We're doing these county briefings where they would explain to the community in San Diego, here's what tier we're in. And then depending on what tier we're in, it meant, can you go get your nails done? Can you go to the gym? And that was all based off of actual like quantitative data, like what our case rate was and what our ICU capacity was and the hospitalization rate and the death rate and all of those numbers. So I think, that's something that you can't turn on the nightly news or you can't turn on CNN and figure out, can I go to a nail salon in San Diego? You have to turn to the local news for that. So I think we became extremely important, especially to viewers. And I think even the county supervisors would tell me that, a lot of their constituents had no idea who they were prior to the pandemic, but they almost became like strange superstars during COVID because they were doing all these daily briefings. And so people became accustomed to seeing their face and hearing them speak. And, as you guys saw throughout the country and here in San Diego, there were rallies that were being held outside, small business owners who were saying, we've had enough of these restrictions, our livelihood is on the line here. And, we get that if we go outside, we might expose ourselves to this virus, but we also need to pay our bills. So it became extremely personal to everyone what was going on during the pandemic, whether that was politics or being able to send your kids to school. So again, those decisions were really playing out on like a hyper local level. And I think that's why people needed their local news organizations more so than ever before.
So you talked a little bit about, developing sources at the local level and how you have officials that are comfortable telling, coming to you with a story that they may want to tell. Can you talk a little bit about how you develop those sources on the local level, and about maintaining those relationships?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it comes from a variety of things. So obviously with politics, there are the natural sort of meeting cycles that happen, like the county supervisors have meetings, city council has meetings. So you sort of have to browse through their agendas. And one thing I've learned is if you become friends with the communications people and you're on a regular texting basis, they'll oftentimes tip you off like, hey, there's something that's coming up in this meeting that might be newsworthy to you. And a lot of those communications people are former journalists. So they're a great resource because they understand what's newsworthy and what your audience might be interested in. So that's really important to keep those lines of communication open because it's really impossible for one person to try to monitor all of this stuff. At local newsrooms, we also have an assignment desk, and that's staffed basically almost 24 hours a day. And those are the people who will like listen to police scanners, and it's sort of like the nucleus of the local news station. So all of the press releases that come into NBC7, it comes into one email address. And then it's the assignment desk that sort of gathers or sort of, goes through all of that and figures out, kind of prioritizes what's the most important thing perhaps to cover. And then they'll go to Ish, who, by the way, he was promoted to assistant news director. So now he's pretty much in charge of all of the news. And he's kind of he's the guy to go to if he says, green lights, this is what we're going to cover today. And he's basically responsible for guiding like the editorial coverage of the day. So they kind of will like aggregate all the information, and then Ish will go through it and say, well, here are the resources we have and here's what we can cover and how we can cover it. And maybe something won't rise to the level of we're going to send a reporter to cover it, but perhaps we'll send a camera out there and get video of it. And then we'll have an anchor talk about it, but we don't necessarily need a reporter to do like a deeper dive and do interviews and contextualize it. So anyway, I forget what your original question was, but that's kind of, at least from our end, a lot of it is like monitoring stuff. We'll pitch. We're supposed to pitch all the time. Ish will probably tell you. This is the first time I've ever done something like this with my boss, like listening to everything I'm saying. So it's like a little bit awkward. But so we're supposed to pitch to Ish on like a daily basis. Sometimes I struggle with that because sometimes, I mean, this might seem surprising, but you actually do have like slow news periods where you're just like, oh my God, there's nothing to do right now. And then other times you feel like there's 1,000 things to do and there's no possible way you can cover it all. So we send like daily/weekly emails with Ish, and we have phone conversations multiple times a day where we'll sort of talk through like, what do we cover? How do we cover it? And that's essentially how that process works.
That makes sense. And that I want to give Ishmael a chance to respond since you mentioned it, but just Ishmael, like her talking about the influx of, stories. I'm sure there's no shortage of it coming in San Diego. How do you kind of filter through the noise and decide, what's going to go on air, what's going to be written in digital? What's the art to that?
It really just comes down to how does it affect the viewer? And that's really the number one barometer that we use. You have a lot of information. You have a lot of people trying to get on the news and trying to figure out how to pitch their stories. But for me, it's always, okay, what does it mean? Is it education based? Are we affecting a lot of people? Are we talking about 2 people? The pandemic really allowed us to kind of take a step back and really examine that. When I was at CNN, we always used to look at everything at such a macro level. And we used to kind of pick and choose which stories we would fly into and do those stories. And really, it was more of an interest kind of related story. Here locally, what was great during the pandemic was that everything that we were producing really affected people here locally. They were turning on the news because they didn't know whether they could go to school that day. They didn't know what the infection rates were. They had no idea, where they could go grocery shopping, or essentially where the latest problems were, and they would change day to day, or what the rules were. So it allowed us a real opportunity to kind of sit back and not just chase crime-related stories, but really go after stories that mean a lot. And it kind of allowed us to really refocus what local news means, in my opinion. And we've kind of adjusted that. So I don't like chasing a lot of crime. And I think this really gave us an opportunity to really think about what the viewer cares about.
And this question goes out to any of you, all of you, if you want to answer. You talk about the viewer and what the needs of the viewer are, but you can't talk about local news without mentioning, the effects on some of the policy and the government, and some of the things that are the way things are done at the local level. Have you done or reported any or brought any stories in that made a massive change to institutions within your community?
Massive change within the institutions to our community. Over the course of time that I've been doing local news, because I was in local news for like 10 years before I went to CNN. The answer would be, yeah, there are stories. You're going to run across those stories where you can affect change in policy. I don't necessarily know that because of reporting recently, we changed. I think we highlighted a bunch of stuff and we showed that people were flaunting the rules a little bit, but I don't know that we necessarily had a direct effect in change, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's kind of hard to know exactly what correlated to the change. But I mean, I think you saw like politicians on all levels, at least during the pandemic, change the way that they approached how they were going to do like restrictions and mandates and things like that. And that was probably very reactionary to the way that people were perceiving what they were doing, right? And how do people perceive things? It's because of us, because we're the ones that are putting the information out. It's sort of like this cyclical thing where I don't think you can necessarily say like the media perhaps or local journalists are the ones that drove Governor Newsom to throw away the color-coded tier system. But because of us explaining all of it and people understanding, okay, wait, this is the way California does it. And oftentimes like Ish will ask me, well, maybe we should do a comparison piece, like what is Texas doing? What's Governor Abbott doing? What's Governor DeSantis doing? How is that different in California? And what are the case rates, right? And that's what's cool about NBC7 is like we have managers who are cool with us kind of taking a deeper dive and look into things, which might take a little bit longer than just the typical, let's stand outside after the news conference and say what they said, which we do that too. But then let's also take a look at like how other places are doing things and is their method better or worse, or what are the results? So I think that's also interesting.
And so you talk a lot about the the story flow and the influx of things that you need to report. Can you kind of give us an inside view of what a day-to-day looks like for you and managing all those stories, reporting on them, making sure that they get explained to the level they deserve to be explained at? But what's that look on the day-to-day level, if you can give us a picture?
So it starts out always with a call from Ish in the morning. Sometimes we have an editorial meeting at 9 a.m. So anyone who works on the day side shift, which is 9 to 7 p.m. essentially, we're all in that phone call, which used to be like an actual in-person around the conference table meeting. And we go through what the stories of the day are going to be. It used to be kind of like a conversation and people would pitch ideas, but now we sort of try to do a lot of that pre-planning before the actual meeting. And then we talk about where everybody's going. We have 3 newscasts during the day, the 4 p.m. news, the 5 and the 6. The 4 and the 6 are hour-long shows, and the 5 is a half an hour that leads into the national news, so the nightly news with Lester Holt. And so a lot of times for me personally, and I think this was the experience of a lot of people during the pandemic, we would know our story mostly the day before we would start. So that helped a little bit because we could make phone calls or write emails the night before. But a lot of times you're not really getting your story or knowing until the morning you wake up, because things happen overnight. They happen in the morning. You know, us being on the West Coast, they'll happen in DC. So sometimes, you know, I'll wake up and it's like, whoa, a whole bunch of things just happened. And I'm like totally, you know, trying to play catch up. So that can change a lot of what we do. And then you basically will get your assignment, you know what you're doing by 9:15 in the morning. And then you have like 6 hours to turn that around. So you need to go find people to interview. You need to get video. You need to write a story. So then we send our scripts. Well, it used to be to Ish when he was the managing editor, and he would go through it and give us feedback. You know, are there things that need to be fact checked? Have we gotten all the voices that need to be in that story in there? Stylistically, could this be written in a better way or a tighter way? And then sometimes we're live in the shows. So we'll be live standing outside the county supervisor's building in the 4 and the 6, and we'll toss to a story. And typically we do 2 versions of a story a day. So you pretty much get your assignment at around 9:15 at the latest. And then you're on air within however many, I'm bad at math, like, you know, 7, 8 hours, whatever it is. So it's a lot. You have to manage your time really well. And I think it's important to be efficient, like to do quick interviews, to do your research before you do your interview, so you're not asking people questions that you could have Googled before you started the interview, and just kind of have a sense of what exactly are the major points that I need to be telling in the story. And I think that kind of news judgment just comes from experience, and like the longer you do this, the easier it is. And a lot of the things that we cover are actually, we cover them over and over again. So for me, it's been like the infrastructure agreement, Build Back Better, now the Supreme Court hearing the Mississippi abortion ban. So when you do the same story over and over again, it does make it a little bit easier because you sort of know what you're walking into before it happens. So those things can help sort of make your day a little less confusing.
And I'm glad you mentioned some of the national, specifically political issues that you know, are being talked about and reported on. Can you tell us a little bit about Politically Speaking, the show that you host?
So it comes on Sundays after Meet the Press. So if any of you are familiar, Chuck Todd hosts a national, it's according to the little man who speaks during the headlines, it's the longest running political news show on TV or something like that. I don't know. So it's been around for decades. But he does a great job of getting really high profile people, you know, sort of the most newsworthy politicians that are in the centers of the controversy. So maybe that's, you know, Kirsten Sinema when it came to the Build Back Better negotiations and the infrastructure negotiations. So because he has that brand name of Meet the Press, and he is Chuck Todd, and this is NBC national news, he's able to bring in a lot of those heavy hitters to talk about exactly what's going on. And I think his goal is probably to make headlines and, you know, get these people to really say something perhaps that they haven't said before. My goal, I guess, on a smaller level is to do something like that. But I mean, Ish and I have this conversation all the time. We literally had this conversation 2 hours ago about like, what are the goals of the show? Like, what are we trying to do? And I think it's a combination of trying to get our elected leaders to give them a platform to answer questions, because I do believe, and this sounds corny, this is what they told us in journalism school, but that journalists are sort of, we're a voice for the people, right? So I view Politically Speaking as a platform to be able to hold politicians accountable to their constituents who are our viewers. And that's really complicated because, you know, there are several districts in our viewing area. And I want to make sure that I talk to all of those people equally, because I get a lot of hate on social media, people trying to guess, what political ideology I subscribe to. And perhaps, my guess there's some sort of indication as to the way my preferences. But then in addition to that, I think it's also important, as Ish was saying, to talk to actual people who are impacted by the policies, right? So that's something that I tried to do when it came to the school debates. Should schools remain closed or should they open again? And so I tried to find parents on both sides of that issue and to have a civilized panel, as I like to call it, because I think, oftentimes people say that they turn off the TV or they're turned away from it because they just see people screaming at each other all the time. So I like to have, civil discourse. And some of the shows that I've been the most proud of over the last year are shows where I was able to dedicate the entire 23 minutes that I have, minus the commercials, to one specific topic and really try to localize it. So one example of that that's probably interesting to this particular group of people is, the Afghanistan withdrawal that we all saw happen back in August. That's something that anyone who's in the military, that really hits close to home for all of us, right? So I did a panel, or I spoke to most of our congressional delegation members about what does this mean? What went wrong? Like, oh my gosh, there were such dramatic pictures. Then I had a panel with 2 veterans who served in Afghanistan. And then I spoke to a refugee who had worked alongside, the American military in Afghanistan and who had now resettled in San Diego County on a special immigrant visa. So that was a show that I was really proud of, because especially here in San Diego, we have such a huge military population and veteran population and refugee population. And those communities were all really watching this international story unfold. And it was really personal and emotional for a lot of people. So I was really excited that I was able to find, with the help of a lot of my coworkers, these great voices to speak so passionately about those images that we saw on CNN. And I think, that's what my goal is for San Diegans to turn on the show and see how those bigger issues impact their neighbors, or even maybe them too.
No, I appreciate you saying that, because you answered my next question about bringing those national issues to the local level and how you do that. And I think that's a perfect example, bringing local voices to show, these national issues have an effect within your community. So I appreciate you saying that. I do want to ask, and we have a question from the chat before we get to that. Priya, so can you talk a little bit about your military experience? And you're kind of in a unique situation, in the MVJ context, because you're still in the Navy, and you're a reporter. So can you tell us a little bit about that, duality?
Yeah, so I think most of the MVJ members who I've been connected with, they served in the military and then they're trying to get into journalism. So I understand that path. In the Navy, I'm a public affairs officer. So our community includes the mass communication specialist, the enlisted rate that goes along with that. So what we do in the Navy is, all the things that I do in the civilian side. So shoot and edit video, write stories, do interviews, all of those things, and tell the Navy story, as we like to say, and put all of that stuff on divots, which, a lot, for those of you who aren't familiar with divots, it's where the Defense Department puts all of their imagery and their videos. And a lot of newsrooms across the United States had no idea that this platform exists. So the Navy tried to recruit, professionals into the public affairs community who might have insight into, what it's like to work in news organizations. How can we better pitch to news organizations to tell the Navy story? Like, how does it work on the inside of a newsroom? So anyhow, I joined the Navy about 5 years ago. So I'd already been a reporter for almost like 9 years at that point. So it was very strange to do it the other way around. And, I've talked about this, Drew, with you a lot, but the second you tell a group of people in uniform that you're a reporter, that's like the fastest way to clear the room. I mean, people do not want to talk to you because they're just like terrified of you. And vice versa. I think I've noticed a lot of reporters who, when they get in front of people with uniforms, especially people with lots of stars, they're super intimidated and they don't know how to communicate with people because it seems like it's 2 different worlds. However, having now bridged that gap, I've realized that there's a lot more commonalities between those 2 worlds than you might initially think. I think both groups of people are really committed to serving their community, whether that's their country or here as a local journalist, the San Diego community. It's people who don't necessarily want to sit behind a desk. They want to get their hands dirty, be out in the field, meeting people. And so, yeah, there's a lot of that. And I would say that I've now worked in two areas that are heavily concentrated with military folks here in San Diego and then San Antonio, Texas. And I think that having a lot of friends who are in the Navy or veteran friends has given me tons of story ideas that I might not necessarily be able to cover myself, but I'll pass them along to colleagues. And, you know, I think that, like, as a newsroom, when we're having those morning meetings, it's important that we're listening to our community and, like, what are they talking about? And, you know, earlier this week, we did the story on the vaccine mandates that were coming down in the military, and, you know, were people going to get discharged because they hadn't gotten their vaccine? And that's something that, I mean, you guys all probably know, everybody on bases is talking about right now, like how many people got exemptions, stuff like that. So yeah, I think that, you know, it's been really cool for me to have friends who are dealing with all of these things, and then I'm able to kind of give a little bit of insight to the reporters who might be covering it about, these are at least what my friends and the people that I'm talking to think about these different issues.
Sage, I want to throw the question in the group your way. And Brianna writes, to a company like NBC7, how realistic is it to be hired right out of working as a broadcast journalist in the Air Force? Would I have to get a degree in journalism to be considered competitive?
So that's a little tricky, but I would say the weight of having that real world experience is going to outweigh most of the time that degree. However, there are some positions that do require it, depending upon the company. But having that hands-on experience will definitely translate to many jobs in the newsroom.
And just while we're talking to you, Sage, I want to ask a quick question before we go to Ishmael. But can you just describe a little bit about your role as an HR manager for NBC7?
Sure. I'll give everyone a little background because I have kind of it is a bit unique, my career change. I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and majored in journalism, started out as an assignment editor in Palm Springs, and then went to a cable station in Orange County and decided I wanted to be a producer. Well, that cable station shut down a month before 9/11. So it was a really interesting time. Through networking, and because so many of us had been laid off, I was able to land the job at CanSD as the morning show producer. And I did that I produced, I think, for about eight or 9 years, got my master's in leadership and decided I wanted to go into news management. And then, you know, I love news. I've always loved news. I'm curious. I want to know what's going on in my community, but the side of the news management that I particularly loved was people managing, and I tended to do more of that. So that's where my interest in HR came from. And so after, I actually was just with the company for 20 years last month, right before the pandemic, I think a month before Priya, a position opened up and an opportunity came up in HR. So I was able to pitch that change. And it was a huge change, going from being a news EP and being immersed in that to switching over to HR, and then all of a sudden becoming a contact tracer during a pandemic. So, you know, I think mine is not one that is, you hear a lot about people in news kind of switching maybe to recruiting. I'm doing right now, we actually just had we have a lot of movement right now in the newsroom, and our HR director, Niru, is now at CNBC, which is an amazing opportunity for her. So my role is right now, it's personnel issues, it's recruiting, it's hiring, it's everything from payroll to if there's military leave pay questions, that type of thing. So it's pretty broad. We have 190 employees right now. I can say the pandemic has been a huge time of movement. We've hired now about 47 people, which is unbelievable for a station, of our size.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, no, I appreciate you going into your background too, because I think it's important for people to know that it takes a lot to produce the sausage, so to speak. It's kind of like the Air Force, where the Air Force is known for flying planes, but only 10% of the entire force actually flies. It takes another 90% to actually get them off the ground. So the only jobs in media are not anchoring or reporting like Priya. There's so many other important parts of it that I don't think a lot of people realize, from floor directors to people who recruit, news management, that type of thing. And that kind of brings me over to you, Ishmael. Is I see you as the intermediary between the talent, the news. You're kind of the man in the arena. You're like the center of everything that goes on. And I'm just wondering how do you manage that responsibility on a personal level? What is that like? Are you working crazy hours? Give us like Priya, give us kind of like the day to day.
Yeah. So, I mean, my days don't stop. But I kind of got that from my old job when I was at CNN. As you well know, it's just that your days don't stop. Like, just because you have a 9 to 5 hours or 9 to 6 hours doesn't mean that you stop paying attention and stop going on, taking phone calls, talking to people. And I kind of treat this job the same way. When I leave each day, what I'm trying to do is set up the next day and trying to make sure that we're in a good place for the next day. The minute I wake up, I'm looking at my phone, which everyone says don't do, but I can't help it. I do. It's the first thing I do. I grab my phone and I start looking. I'm like, okay, what happened the night before? What are my plans that are going to have to change for today? How are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? And then really start getting the day set up from home. Before breakfast, just making sure that we're in a decent spot, drive in, have conversations with producers on my way into work, finish filling out the day and then calling each reporter who's on the schedule that day and saying, are you set up? Can you do this? Can you do that? Do you think we could do this? All right, I'll tell you what, we're going to have our morning meeting, and then afterwards we'll chat more about this. And then going about our day, figuring out everything. And then after the call, setting up, everything. Because there's more than just the daily grind of the news. You're trying to do specials. You're trying to do investigative work. You're trying to get your anchors involved. You're trying to do a bunch of different things. So that's what I spend a good part of my day doing, trying to get them going. And then the scripts start coming in and questions start coming in from reporters. And so it's like this cycle. You're on a treadmill constantly.
Right. So, and I'm glad that you mentioned the long form pieces, because as it's important for local news stations to do those investigative segments or the 10-minute shows, that type of thing. How do you manage that while doing the day-to-day grind of breaking news? How do you make sure that those investigative reports don't fall by the wayside and people are doing their job when chasing those stories?
Well, the good news is we have a team. So we have an executive producer who looks over the investigative unit. I come from an investigative background. So for the first 10 years of my career was primarily investigative. So I have a vested interest in investigative. And when I was with CNN, I also did a lot of investigative work with Anderson and other people as well. So I have a really big interest. I could never see myself ever letting it go. I just love it too much because you really get to dive in and ask questions and do stuff. So I think it's hugely important. Equally as important, I think, are also getting your anchors involved in the storytelling, whether it be investigative or just a really good story. Mm-hmm. So I like to keep those things going. So it's just a matter of making sure that you put those irons in the fire and allow things to kind of build for future stories. You can't do it all right away. It takes a little bit of time, but as long as you're meeting constantly, making sure you can get stuff on the air, when can you get it on the air, scheduling it out. That I think is what people remember the news stations for, is when you're really able to hit really big stories. So I think it's hugely important. I mean, it's a huge priority of mine.
Well, there's also a lot of strategy that goes into reporting an investigative piece. Do you have planning sessions with or either in your experience at CNN, anywhere else on an investigative team? Do you guys have planning sessions? Do you know how do you divide it up on who's going to tackle what? What's the process like for starting those stories, especially at the local level?
It's the same as it's just about the pitch, right? Who is it affecting? Why do I care? How important is it? Or does this really mean that we need to go after someone because they've done something? Does this really mean that we need to dive into this particular issue because it's affecting a bunch of people? And it's asking each other those questions. Are we hitting something on the surface, or do we need to go after something bigger? It's all story based, in my opinion, and it has to be kind of on the news as well. So you can have these longer term stories which are really important and need to be done, and then you have shorter term stories which are really playing off the day's news, and they're easier to turn, but they're equally as important. And it's a mix between the two, and it's having constant communication with the investigative team to make sure that we are hitting that, but also making sure that they get on the air, because an investigative team that doesn't get on the air but only shows up once every couple of months is not an investigative unit. I firmly believe that investigative teams need to be on the air.
I want to pull at that thread a little bit. Like, what can you explain that a little bit more? Can you go into, the value of an investigative team and why they need to be on the air?
I've been a part of many units in my career. I've been on part of units where where it's funny, when I first started, I started at WFLD in Chicago, and there was this long-term producer who worked out at WLS, which is the ABC affiliate in Chicago. We all went for drinks, and I was like looking up to these guys because I was really nervous starting my career there. And this guy said to me, I'll never forget it. He said, I think my success in a day is if I set up an interview and and I'm good. That's all I did today, is I set up an interview that I'm solid. And I thought, what in the heck? I don't really understand that. I really don't. For me, it's just way more. So I've been part of units that turn things very slowly. I've been part of units that turn things too quickly. And then I've kind of been a part of units that are in the middle. I am far too insecure to not be on the air. So I like to make sure that we find a balance of turning stories that are important to the viewers, that don't require as much legwork but are still investigative, and make sure that those get on the air while you're working on the bigger projects on the long term. All your efforts cannot be on the long-term projects, because then the viewer's not going to know who you are. The viewer's not going to know why you're important to the station. They're not going to notice your investigative work. If you want to be known for the investigative work that you do, then you've got to be able to get on the air as often as possible. Drew Griffin, perfect example for CNN. He's a good friend of mine, and man, when a big story hits, you're going to find Drew all over the place. And everyone knows when Drew gets on the air, he's delivering a really solid investigative project. That's what I strive to do.
And talking about you being the kind of the intermediary between all of these things going on, you obviously have to have a good pulse on the audience, right? How do you keep that pulse, and how do you know which stories to deliver them?
It's different. I don't know. I know Sage would be able to answer this as well. I think for me, I don't look at ratings. And I know it makes a lot of times people open up the ratings, and I know Priya does it too. She wants to see who's watching her show. I don't look. I don't care. I want to make sure that the shows feel good. Do I feel like we've delivered the right thing? Do I feel like the viewers, in the way that we're getting responses via emails or calls, or just viewer responses when reporters are out there hearing from them, do I feel like we hit a good tone for that day? That's kind of what I judge it on, because I never really know why a viewer watches any particular day. Sometimes you'll miss viewers because they get stuck in traffic on the way home. So I don't know. For me, I just like to stay away from really judging on a day-to-day basis what we get. And I think that's when you can start making mistakes, is if you start worrying about the numbers that you're delivering, then you start guessing why they tuned in, and then you could miss your mark, in my opinion. I don't know, Sage would probably have a different answer, but.
Sage, you want to go ahead and answer?
I agree. I think, having been a producer and an EP, just thinking about ratings makes me dizzy right now. And just now that I don't have to look at that, it's fabulous. But, you do have to see it from both sides, I think, especially, when you're talking to sales and when you're looking at the bottom line. obviously that's how our revenue is generated. But then when, when you're in the thick of it, like Ish is saying, I mean, all that matters is that you're putting on you have both sides and great editorial content. And you could have, I mean, I remember having some amazing shows where, you're pouring your blood, sweat, and tears into it and the ratings don't deliver. And it's the worst feeling to look at those numbers, and know that that's what you're being judged on rather than the content or what you put into that. So I think it's twofold. And now being in HR, obviously I see more of the revenue piece, but speaking from my roots and being a journalist, I definitely agree with Ish.
And this question goes to all of you, because Ishmael, you mentioned, with the ratings conversation, you base it on how a show, you want it to feel good. What does a good show feel like? What is if not ratings, what's the litmus test for a good show?
I like to hit it on topics. I like to make sure, so if you're really looking at 3 particular topics of a day, political topics, local topics, and how it affects the viewers. Those can change. Those topics can change each day. But if I can hit like a theme, basically, like say, just as an aside, like Biden's announcement today. Okay, what does it mean for people who are traveling? What does it mean for people? And are people getting tired of the restrictions? Are people just getting blown out? So does that mean that people aren't going to be paying attention to the restrictions? And then, making sure that you're hitting those points and it flows well, and you feel like you're getting in and out of each topic really well, and you're delivering each topic with a well thought out piece. That's what I think is good. Flow, I think, is the best way to describe it. Are you hitting important points throughout the show, and are you just not cramming it full of stuff just to fill time?
Priya, what about you?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, no, that's like a great point. And I think that's one thing, like I've worked at, I think this is like my 7th or my 8th newsroom. So I've bounced around a lot, but I don't know if this was like a pandemic thing or an NBC7 thing, but I think we've done like a really good job because of that's the way that Ish sometimes will delegate the story, where it's like a topic and then each reporter will get like a piece of the topic. And I can just say that as a reporter, it is so fantastic to approach it like that, because sometimes it's so hard to get everything into 2 minutes. So when like, oh, well, this person's going to do like what we often say in TV, like nuts and bolts. So they're going to sort of outline, here's the announcement, here's what happened. And then the next reporter is going to get, okay, now I'm going to be at the airport or whatever. And are people saying that this 24-hour COVID test, that's like going to be too much and I'm just not going to travel at all. And then we're going to go to the next reporter who's at a COVID testing site and seeing like, are the lines longer now that these things are happening? So, and like another great thing about the station, I'm not just saying this because we have HR and my boss on here, but we actually have like a really great people that we work with, and we all get along really well, which is awesome. And so we all are just like texting each other and checking in during the day to make sure that we're not stepping on each other's toes, because we don't want to be repetitive. And so we've had like some really cool shows where like Ish has emailed all of us. One big one I can think of is when California decided to reopen again, or we called it that. We got rid of the color-coded tier systems and all the businesses opened again. And Ish has been a huge proponent of doing, whenever something big is happening, let's go into the community and actually report the news from outside instead of sitting behind an anchor desk. So we did that for that day, and we had reporters like hitting every single topic. And then more recently, with the border restrictions were lifted for non-essential travelers. So Ish sent out the anchors to the border, and we had a bunch of reporters hitting on each angle of that. What does this mean for businesses? Are they excited that they could get more customers coming, across the border? I touched on political stuff. I talked to political leaders about how much they had been advocating for it. And I mean, granted, obviously, when I watch the news, I'm watching it from a biased perspective, but when I watch it, I was like, that's so cool. Like, it looks cool. It seems like we just covered it so thoroughly. And it looks, it's neat to see everyone out because that's where we should be. We should be outside, right? Not like behind desks and stuff like that. So I think that's when the shows look really, really interesting to me.
Priya, I want to ask you because we got a question in the chat, and I want to preface this question too that if you're still in the military and you're looking to get out and go into media, one of the greatest reps that you can get is writing stories for your PAO. It's and Priya, you can talk to this. It's like the same, use AP style. There's the same elements to it. The question in the chat, with that context is, when you're doing public affairs in the Navy, have you found that it's more public relations than actual journalism? Which I know it might be a tough question to answer, but at least from my experience doing it, the elements are there, right?
Well, right. Yeah. So you're going out. It's literally just like journalism in a way. You're going outside, you're trying to document something, you're interviewing people, and you're taking pictures and you're doing video. So I feel like with my sailors, I always tell them the things that like my leaders have always told me as a journalist, like find a compelling character, tell somebody's story. Nobody cares how many buttons are on the aircraft. Like literally nobody cares. And I find that, in the military, I'm sure a lot of you can probably relate. It's all about like numbers and like, okay, well, this aircraft was used on this mission. And it's so much jargon and acronyms. And it's like, oh my God, what does it all mean? Like nobody understands. And I still don't understand. And I've been in the Navy for 5 years. And guess what? Nothing has exploded because I don't understand how many buttons are on that aircraft. So whenever I send out sailors, like it doesn't even matter what our goal is. Like sometimes we have the goal of we're trying to get external media to cover a certain event. And in that case, I always tell whatever PAOs are writing the press release, stop it with the jargon. Just say, here's the most visual thing of what we're trying to do. This is we always do this exercise in Thailand because of, and I know we have to use our little phrases that we always use, but I mean, journalists can put 2 and 2 together. Why is the US military floating around in Asia? Like, hello. So what are they going to see and who are they going to get the opportunity to interview? That's literally all you have to write in the press release. You don't need to write like the history of Thai American relations. Like, again, nobody cares. And that's what Google's for. But even just as we're practicing, like for divots or whatever, or if you're currently in the military and you have an opportunity to do some sort of assignment for a PAO, like read your local newspaper, watch your local news, see how they tell stories. You'll find that, I mean, I don't like to use the word formulaic because that sounds like we're just doing the same thing over and over again, but oftentimes a good journalist will find a really compelling character, and that's what draws you into the story because you feel as though you're developing a connection with that person, right? And you care, you have, you're now invested in whatever it is that they're concerned about. And it's literally the same thing with the military. And the only people who are going to really understand that is you guys. I tell the sailors that I work with all the time, you know what it's like to be on a carrier and have 4 hours of sleep a night for like months on end. So tell it to me like that. Like, what is it like to work in the kitchen for 6 months, mass producing food for like thousands of sailors? Like, I don't know. I don't work in the kitchen. I'm in the public affairs shop, but what is it like? That must be a lot, So, and that's the thing, as a lot of you guys know, a lot of the public affairs stuff in the military is for us internally so that we can see what other people in the military are doing. So you should just approach it like that your audience, whoever it is that you're creating this article or video or whatever it is, they don't know who this person is, what they do. And so it's like telling a story to your friend over the phone. Just explain it extremely simply, try to make it relatable and find a person to center it around. And that's really like kind of all you need.
And this is kind of a loaded question, but if you had a sailor, send you an email or come up to you and say, hey, I'm getting out of the Navy. I'm trying to pursue my journalism degree. I have this great idea for a story. Can I pitch it to you? Can you let me write it? What would you tell them?
Are you talking about like for the Navy or for like NBC?
Someone who was outside of your PAO shop.
They want to write it in the Navy.
Correct. Right. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, like, I feel like that kind of stuff happens all the time. And I mean, I listen to everybody who has ideas, right? Because a lot of times, even those ideas will translate to the outside world and like NBC. So yeah, I mean, I would encourage everyone to go to wherever their public affairs officer is or through their chain of command. And if they think they have a good idea, they should, speak up and say something. And I mean, I would just say that when it comes to like my sailors asking me something, I'm always like, okay, logistics, like when and where is this happening? Like, how are we going to cover it? I mean, it's weird because my role in the Navy is actually more similar to like what Ish does. And that's why I have a lot of respect, because I'm like, I don't want to do this on the outside world. This is a lot of work. But a lot of times it's not even that the idea isn't good. It's like it's a matter of how are we going to actually make this idea happen? So if the person with the idea can also provide that kind of logistical help, that makes it all the easier for me to pitch it up the chain,
And Sage, I want to get to you and talk a little bit about, getting your foot in the door in an organization like NBC7. And the reason why I asked Priya that is because I was kind of a product like that, and I used a lot of clips from stuff that I had done for my PAO shop when I was in for news jobs. So if someone came to you looking for a job at NBC7, they had a pretty good resume, they had some clips from their time, doing some stuff for their PAO. What are the things that you would consider with them? What are some of the things that you're looking for?
So I think I probably have about 5 recommendations for veterans applying to the organization. I would say the biggest, especially right now with just this changing landscape, is know what you want. Sometimes you'll see that people start applying to multiple jobs just because they want to work for a particular company, and recruiters and hiring managers are going to look at that and kind of question the motivation, drive, and the career goals. So really knowing what it is that you're looking for and what you want. Make sure that you're highlighting how your experiences that you've had will translate to the job that you're interested in. Focus on those leadership skills, your communication skills, obviously big events, and any of those experiences. That really helps the recruiters and the hiring managers gain that insight into your knowledge and how you might fit within the culture, of the organization. The third big one, obviously, it's networking. We've all heard it a million times, but it is so evident right now, especially with hybrid and remote roles. The new, HR and recruiters are looking constantly now on LinkedIn. And I think LinkedIn before was, it was used, but now it is just absolutely at the top. So it's really important to be sharing content often, updating your profile, adding links to stories. It really is about that. And that ties back in, with just basic networking as well. I think when you get past that initial process of just having someone look at your resume, people right now want to see who you are during the interview process. Sometimes people are so eager to demonstrate the value to the company that you forget to be yourself. And, as more companies look to hire, they're looking for that right cultural fit. And sometimes that candidate who has a great personality can really beat out that someone with a strong, resume. And then I think most importantly right now, progress shows potential. So employers really want applicants who can change and evolve, at the same pace as the companies, because right now that's what companies are doing. And showing how you've grown to take on more responsibilities and get promoted, it'll give hiring managers that insight into how you might develop at their companies. Those are probably 5 of my tips for now, at this moment.
Those are great tips. And I'll be honest, I've never heard the, hiring managers making decisions based on personality over experience sometimes. And you don't have to give names, but do you have like an example of that where that kind of worked out for any organization you've been a part of?
I think, it in sales. Coming from a journalism background, I didn't have a lot of experience with sales, but being through and going through some of these recent interviews and the hiring process, it really is about that cultural fit. And right now doing interviews all on Zoom or Teams, it's very difficult. So if you're able to kind of take it to that next level really let something unique just shine through, it really does help you stand apart.
No, that's really great.
I will add to that. We recently had a candidate for a manager position at our station. And I don't like to ask traditional questions during an interview. I really want to get to know why the person is good. This particular person came with a lot of international experience, but didn't have a ton of local experience. But from the minute we started talking, I knew this was a candidate. I knew that this person was great. And I knew that this person would be a great fit in the newsroom. And all that won me over compared to the other people who had a little bit more experience. And it proved to be a pretty good hire, in my opinion.
What what kind of like closed the deal with them for you based on their personality? What was the connection that you liked?
The biggest thing about managing people, especially when everyone's unhappy during the pandemic and everyone has complaints and everyone's stressed out and anything can be a trigger. I know when I get a text from somebody, I'm like, oh, okay, here we go. This is going to be a difficult day. You have to be able to manage those personalities because it's a lot. It's a lot to handle. And I don't do a very good job of it all the time too. I tend to, I hit my load and then I start going, oh no, I start going downhill. But in order to, it's really difficult managing people when they're not in the building and when they're not around you constantly, because you're still faced with a lot of the problems that a reporter is always going to be faced with. So someone with a good personality, a good people person, someone that knows more than just the X's and O's of how to do news, but knows how to manage and get the best out of people during really challenging times is a huge plus. And I think, it really spotlights a lot of the difficulties that I think a lot of, not just newsrooms, but organizations around the world are having when it comes to the thing about the X's and O's that was valued so highly, but now you're suddenly dealing with a lot more personnel issues than you probably ever thought you would have to deal with. So you need to have somebody who's affable, who can get along with that and drive through that, while at the same time, maintaining the standards that you want to in a newsroom.
So unfortunately, we're running low on time. I feel like we could talk forever because these conversations are so great. But I wanted to open up to each of you if you wanted to talk about anything that we didn't cover that you think is important for the military veterans and journalism community to know about. Sage, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. Is there anything that we didn't cover, or anything that you'd like us to know?
Well, we're in the middle of a hiring boom right now. So we have several different openings, and it's really important to know that we're also a duopoly. So it's Telemundo and NBC. We have sales roles open, we have story producer roles open, an executive producer role, creative services manager, and then actually, as of today, a chief photographer position as well. So quite a few roles. This really is the time, if you're starting, if you're ready, now's the time, because companies are really changing. They're changing the landscape. People are moving. A lot of people want remote jobs. So there's just a lot more opportunity right now. And please reach out to me. And yes, we are in a hiring boom. Go to NBCUniCareers.com and check them out.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you mentioning that. If you don't mind, after this, sending me that link, and I'll make sure that everyone who attended or signed up gets it. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Ishmael, what about you? Anything that you think we should know?
Being in the military gives you a lot of experience and a world experience and life experience that a lot of people don't have. One of the reasons I get along so well with Priya is because we both have those shared experiences. I've never been in the military, of course, but I've traveled a lot for work, and we've seen the world and we understand life in a different way than a lot of people do. You come at life, I think, you come into a newsroom with a really unique perspective that I think that a lot of newsrooms don't have. You'd be surprised at how much that would bring to the table.
Thank you. Priya?
Yeah, I mean, it's really cool to hear that. And I think, Drew, through MDJ, we're really starting to kind of try to get that message out there. But the Navy and news are two of my biggest loves, and I love my news people and I love my sailors so much. So I'm always available to anyone who's in the military, who's thinking about making that transition into news. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to like shoot me an email or contact me through social media. It's a really exciting career, and I think you would find that it has so many similarities to your active duty time, and it's really rewarding too, and just so much fun. So yeah, any questions, please feel free to reach out to me.
Great. Sage, Ishmael, Priya, thank you so much for taking an hour out of your day. I know you guys are incredibly busy, but it really does mean a lot to us that you would take that time to help us out and kind of peel back the curtain on some of these newsrooms. So thank you again. We'll see you all next time. Bye.
Thank you.